Lamed Vav Beis 36b. The last line of the page. Second, last word in the second to last line, to be precise. My prosbol. What is this document called the prosbol? Amar of Chisda. Rav Chisda says, Poros Buli Ubuti. So Rashi has it with a zayin instead of a samach. It means a fix for Buli Ubuti. Who are the Buli Ubuti? What does that mean? Sabuli Elu Ashirim, that means rich people. I will, this is part of the section of Torah known as the rebuke, the Teichecha, and it says, I will break your strength. Vitani Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, what's this a reference to? Bulois Shabi Yehudah. It's the wealthy people of Yehudah. And Buti is Elu Ha'aniyim. L'chsiv Ha'avet Ta'avitenu. Poverty is called Buti. And therefore, it's the fix for the wealthy and the poor. Amalei Rava Leuza my prosbol. So Rava said to somebody who doesn't speak Hebrew, he says, what do you think the word prosbol means? So he says to him, Amalei Pursa the Milsa. It's the fix for what's necessary, for the fix for the problem. Amar Yehudah Amar Shmuel. Yehudah says the name of Shmuel is Simon Ein Tzrich and Prosbol. The orphans do not need a prosbol. So I believe so. I actually skipped yesterday's daf, but I believe yesterday he spoke more about prosbol. Yeah, and the mechanism of a prosbol basically works by giving your loans over to the courts to collect. Loans of the courts are not in the category where you can't collect them after Shemitah. So Rav Yehudah says in the name of Shmuel, you say if you're an orphan, ain't tzrich and prosbol. It's not necessary to write a prosbol. Why not? Rabbi Gamliel and his court, in other words, they took responsibility to enforce the rights and privileges of the Yisraelim. And in other words, it's as if the court is overseeing the estate if there are young children. And therefore, one second. And therefore, it's as if their documents are given over to the court. Hold on. Yeah, and presumably, this does not seem to be limited to children. Presumably, even adults. The fact that you're an orphan, it means that the court will have some sort of involvement in dividing up the estate and bearing responsibility to make sure that you have what belongs to you. And that itself, that the responsibility the court has accepted, is itself as if the court is now collecting the documents, not the kids. And therefore, they do not require a prosbol. Shnad Hassam, we learned. Ein kaisem prosbol ela ala karka. There's an interesting requirement. It is necessary for a person to own property in order to write a prosbol. It's interesting. I believe there's a taste of this later in the parak.
Why is that? Why do they have to own physical property?
The reason why they have to own physical property is because a typical loan is considered to be a physical property. It's a secure debt.
I see.
Now, obviously, in other words, it means that there has to have been property, even if it was later sold, because the debt is still secured onto a property. A loan with a debt that is not secured is considered unlikely in the first place, and therefore is never included in the enactment of prosbol.
I know that there are questions about how old you can be to actually be an orphan. I know there was discussion about like if you lose your parents, you can't be considered an orphan because you're able to take care of yourself. Are there any notes on this?
That's a good question. I don't know. Excuse the article says my suspicion is that
I was looking for something like in this short. I couldn't find anything yet, but I'll have to look back on it. You haven't found anything in your okay.
No, I believe that I don't think it would make a difference. I think it would be that even an older child. The idea is that
My question is it possible though, if you're at a certain age, to even be ever considered an orphan? Because if you're already to be self-sufficient, all that, you lose your parents, you never reach that status of being an orphan.
yeah, it's I think that is true, but you still often require help from the court
but the
to
court
figure
would be
out
able to
where the
consider that
assets
you-
are and how you're gonna get them, and et cetera.
Thank you.
Okay, now in terms of so why do you need to have property? You need to have property because the standard loan is secured. There's property behind it, and the principal was written for the standard loan. Therefore, if you don't have property, it's not considered as if it's a standard loan, and it was not included in the rabbinical decree. Okay, what happens if the guy doesn't have property? So what you do is the borrower gifts the lender a small piece of property. The comma, how much property does he have to gift him? Kolshum. Any amount of property. He can give him the amount of property it takes to grow one head of lettuce. Rabbi Yehudah says, moreover, even if he doesn't give him that, he lends him space to put his oven. That's also enough to write a principle. So Gemara says, hold on a second. Aini v'atani hill ain't kaisim principle elal otzes nakav bavad nakav insha ain't nakav loy. Hill says that principle has to be written on a pot with a hole in it. Nakav in a pot with a hole, specifically because that's considered connected to the ground. She'ain't nakav, but if there's no hole in it, then that is not sufficient. Hold on a second. If the place where you put your oven, loaning the place where you put your oven, is enough, so why can't he write a principle on the place where his pot is? Obviously, his flower pot without a hole has to occupy some amount of space. So why isn't that space enough to be considered as if he has property? Mar says, you have a place of that pot. In other words, if the space of the oven is sufficient, why isn't the space of a flower pot without a hole sufficient? So Mar says, let's it's on stilts, and it's sort of it's as if it's on a shelf. It doesn't take up actual space. In other words, it takes up space, but it doesn't mean that he owns the ground underneath it, because he could put it on stilts. So he puts something underneath it, as if it's items on a shelf. The Gemara didn't ask him where he puts his bowls. That doesn't mean that you own the space underneath it. The Gemara presumed that a flower pot you would own the space underneath, and the Gemara says no. If you could put it on put it on a stand, so then you don't really, it means it doesn't have to sit on the ground. You don't necessarily have to own the space underneath it, or even have borrowed it. Rav Ashi makni le gidma de dikla. Rav Ashi used to he used to provide someone who, in order to write a principle, he used to provide the lender with a cut down palm tree. So if he had a palm tree that was cut down, he would give him the stump. The cost of a principle, and he would write a principle. Rabbanon deber Rav Ashi matzir milayu lahadadi. Okay, so more the rabbis in the area of Rav Ashi, studied by Rav Ashi, they wouldn't actually write a principle. They would gather together a few rabbis and they would say, we're giving over our documents to you three rabbis. Rav Yossi spoke out the words of the principle to Rav Chia bar Abba. He said to him, do I need to do anything else? It's not necessary. In other words, a principle does not need to be written. One second. So in other words, as long as you tell three people, you make them into a court, even if you don't write them, that is sufficient. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Ein lo karka, ulo orav yesh le karka. The lender does not have property, but the guarantor does. Face a prosbol, then you can write a prosbol. Loi ulo orav ein lahem karka. The lender and the guarantor do not have property. However, ulechayev yesh le karka. Face a prosbol midrab nosen. Let's say as follows. So let's say I borrowed money. I make a chain over here. Jared loaned me money, okay, with Steve as the guarantor, and me and Steve, neither of us own property. However, Nachshon owes me money, and Nachshon has property, so I can theoretically collect Nachshon's property. That's called l'chayev yeshlei. Somebody who owes me money, he has property. So in that case, you write a prosper. Why is this? Because the opinion of Rav Nosson. Rav Nosson says if I owe you and you owe me, I'm sorry, if I owe him and if you owe me and I owe him, then you can go straight to the third borrower. Says I borrowed money from Jared, I loaned money again to Nachshon. Nachshon owes me, I owe Jared. Jared can go collect straight from Nachshon. Typically, the general rule is that if you're not part of a court case, you have no business there. And typically the defendant always has a right to say, I don't know who you are. I never got into an agreement with you, and therefore we're not going to court together.
Now remind me, would he go directly to me or would he go get a cosign?
So either way.
Okay, but would he have to go to one over the other? Okay,
I think actually he does. I think he'd have to go to you first.
Oh, yeah, to me first, okay.
Yeah. There's two types of cosigners. There's an Arav and Arav Kabbalah. The regular cosigner does not pay unless all methods have been used. And because you're a method first, in other words, because you borrowed money from me, so therefore you would pay before the cosigner. And this is the famous opinion of Rav Nosson. Rav Nosson says that Jared would have a right to go straight to Nachshon. And Nachshon cannot say, I never entered into an agreement with you and I want to go to court with you. Because ultimately the money is owed to him. The Tanya we learned. Rav Nosson says, someone who owes his friend money. And his friend owes his friend money. The borrower, the lender has a right to collect from the second level borrower. The lender has a right to collect from the borrower's borrower. You give the money to who it's ultimately owed to. And because, in other words, Asham means who's actually missing the money. Who's missing the money in this scenario? It's the lender. And therefore he has a right to collect from the borrower of the borrower.
There's got to be some sort of like, the middleman's got to be involved somehow.
Nope.
But you could have like some document to say, hey, like you collect, because then he could come back and say, hey, but I want my debt from you again, right? Like you can double collect. Right?
It's have to write a receipt.
That's why you go baseball bats.
Okay. It's not wholesome. We learn Shvius Meshametes as a Molva Ben Bishtar Ben Shalei Bishtar. Shemitah ends when Shemitah comes, you're not allowed to collect the loan anymore, whether the loan was written in a document or whether it was not written in a document. Rav Shmuel Da'am Shavayu Bishtar Sheyesh Be'achrayes Nechosam. Rav and Shmuel explain this Mishnah. What does it mean you wrote it in a document? Writing in a document means there's achrayas. It's a secure debt. There's recourse on property. Bishtar means shtar sheyesh b'achrayas. It has recourse. It's a secure debt. Nechazim shalei bishtar. What does it mean you wrote it without a document? It means that there is a document, but it's she'ein b'achrayas nechazim. But there is no recourse on it. Kol shkein moval pas. Certainly a loan, a verbal agreement. That is not sufficient to a milva peh is not sufficient to I'm sorry, a milva peh is all Shemitah ends a milva peh as well. In other words, a verbal agreement. However, there's another opinion here. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lakish say, so what does a shtar mean? It means a document without the notion of secure debt. Shaloi b'shtar means without a document means milva peh, verbal agreement. In other words, a document is a loan that's not secured. Without a document is a regular verbal agreement. A document that has that where the debt is secured, Shemitah does not end the loan. Why does Shemitah not end the loan? Because in a certain sense, because there's property to secure the debt, in a certain sense, it's more like a sale. We view the security of the debt to belong to the lender, and therefore there's no collection going on. It's more like it's a transfer. I trade you the security of your property for the money that you'll pay back on my loan. Hanikav said Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon Lakish is a brice that supports this opinion of Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Shtar chayv mishamet. A document Shemitah will end the loan. V'im yesh b'achrayas. However, if the loan is secured on property, it will not end the debt. Tanya idach. Another brice says, Sayim lo soda achas b'halva osay. He pointed out to him a specific field with regard to the loan. Ena mishamet, Shemitah will not end the loan. Even if he says, in other words, if he points to a specific property, so it's much more of a direct connection between the lender and the property. The lender has a specific item in question. However, moreover, even if he didn't give him a specific property, he said everything is owed to you. That alone is enough. That alone is enough to require to prevent Shemitah from ending the loan. The relatives of Rav Asi, they had a document which was secured. They went in front of Rav Asi. They asked him, Mishamet or Ein Mishamet? Will Shemitah end this loan or not? He says to him, Ein Mishamet, Shemitah will not end the loan. One second. Hold on a second. It's interesting. So so basically the borrower gets Rav Asi, who's his relative, says to the borrower, says to the lender, you'll be able to collect your debt after Shemitah, because your debt is secured, and secure debt is not in the category of Shemitah ending. So he wasn't satisfied with that answer. Shafki v'asa kamed Rav Yochanan. So he went to Rav Yochanan and he asked Rav Yochanan, Amarlei Mishamet. Rav Yochanan says, no, it will end the loan. Also Rav Asi kamed Rav Yochanan. So Rav Asi found out, and he himself went in front of Rav Yochanan. Amarlei Mishamet, Ein Mishamet. So Amarlei Mishamet. So Rav Yochanan says to him, it will end the loan. So he says to him, hold on a second. You were just the one. You were the one who said that Shemitah will not end a secure debt. The machlokes we just saw was between Rav and Shmuel against Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish says that a documented loan is one that's not secured, and that type of loan, together with a verbal agreement, Shemitah will end. But a loan where the debt is secured, Shemitah will not end that loan. So what's going on? You're flipping around, and now saying that no, Shemitah will end that type of debt as well. He says to him back, System, look, he says, I was just talking out loud, learning the discussion in the base madrash. I didn't actually mean that this should be halacha. I just wasn't sure why it was. But I'm not convinced enough that I would actually, practically speaking, do this. In other words, end a secure debt with, at the conclusion of Shemitah. I'm sorry, I would not end a secure. I would say the debt is over at the end of Shemitah, and because I'm not so convinced. Rav says, hold on, Vatanya Kavasei Demara. You have a bryce that supports your opinion. He says, no proof. The famous opinion of Beishamai is that any secure debt is considered to have been paid back. We had this by Saita. If the husband dies and does not have a chance to make the woman drink, the Shammai says she collects her ksuba. Why? Because ksuba is a secure debt, so therefore it's as if the woman is the one who's the holder of the item. And therefore, if in a case of doubt, she gets to keep her ksuba. So it could be these brises are the opinion of Beishamai, and therefore there's no proof against Rav and Shmuel that a secure debt would end on Shemitah. It's not awesome. Someone who loans money with collateral, or he hands over his documents to the court, then there's no Shemitah will not end alone. So it makes sense why if somebody gives over his documents to the court, Shemitah does not end alone. Why is this? Because the law is that an individual can collect. However, over here, it's not the individual, it's the court that's collecting. Elamal v'elamashkin, my timer. But if somebody loans with collateral, why is it different? Because he's holding the mashkin. And he's holding the collateral and he's saying, look, you want your collateral back, you can pay back the loan. If you don't want it back, I'll keep the collateral. Okay, so Amar Abaya says, hold on a second. What happens if the guy lends money, the lender lends money to the borrower, and 1 second here, the lender lives in the borrower's house. He's rented the property as well. So over here, he's holding on to the property. Hold on a second, 1 second. Correct. In other words, the borrower here is holding on to the lender's property because in other words, the lender is the landlord of the borrower. Right? It's a weird situation. The guy who's loaning the money is the tenant in the guy who borrowed the money. So here they have this weird relationship. So we should say that Shemitah won't end such a loan either because he's living in the guy's house, so he's holding on to it. It's as if to some extent it's paid back. So Amar Leitz, he said no. Shiny mashkin the kani lay midr Yitzchak. Amar Yitzchak. The halacha is that the guy who someone who puts up a collateral, the lender who's holding the collateral, he actually owns the collateral. Because of the law of Rav Yitzchak. Rav Yitzchak, how do we know that a lender owns the collateral? Shenemar, as the pasuk says, this is with regard to a law that you have somebody who is extremely poor. He only has 2 sets of clothes, one for night and one for day. And you took a collateral of one set of the clothes, so you have to switch it right by night. But by end of the day, you have to give him his night clothes and take back the day clothes. End of the night, you give him back. You collect his night clothes, you give him back his day clothes. And the verse states, "Ulachati tzedakah," you'll be righteous. He says, "If you don't actually own it, why is it righteous to give it back to him? If it belongs to him, you have to give it back to him." From here, we see that a creditor owns the collateral. Not how something learns. Someone who pays back after Shemitah, somebody wants to pay back the loan. He must say to him, the loan is over. Shemitah has ended the loan. If he says to him, I still want you to have the money, he's allowed to accept it. Shenemar, as the verse states, these are the words of Shemitah. In other words, you tell him Shemitah has ended the loan. Rabba says, okay. In other words, so Rabbi says, if you're the guy who's paying back and you really want to pay back, you shouldn't pay back until after the guy says to you, I want to pay you back anyway. Abai asks, when he returns the loan, he shouldn't say, I'm giving this back for the debt. So Abai says you shouldn't even tell him that you're paying back the debt. If you insist on paying it back, you should say, it belongs to me. I'm giving it to you as a gift. He says to him, that this as well, if you, the one who's paying back should not pay back until either the guy says it's Shemitah, I can't collect, or he says, or the guy paying back says, this belongs to me, I'm giving it to you as a gift. Abba Bar Marta to Abba Bar Yomei. This fellow's name is Abba Bar Marta. His actual name is Abba Bar Yomei. Have a masikve Rova Zuzi. But Rabba had loaned him money, and he owed Rabba money. I seen him nialei b'shvius. He brought him the money on Shemitah. Amalei, he says Meshabarani. He says Shemitah has ended the loan. Shaglinu v'ozel. So he left. Asabaya, Abaya came. Ashkid have otziv. He saw. 1 second. So Abaya found Abba Bar Yomei, the borrower, depressed. Amalei Amayotziv Mara, why you said Amalei Hachi Havamai, so this is the story. 1 second, I'm sorry. Abaya found Rabba, that Rabba was sad that he couldn't collect the money. So he went. So Amalei Ozlag, he went to Abba Bar Yomei, the borrower. Amalei Amtaslei Zuzi Lamar, did you bring money to Rabba? Amalei says to him, Mishabarani. I'm sorry. Amalei I did. Amalei Amalach, what did he tell you? Amalei, he says, Rabba said to me, Mishabarani, that Shvius has ended the loan. Amalei, the Amrlei Alpha became, did you tell him that I still want to pay it back? Amalei Loi. He says, no. Amalei the Amrlei Alpha became, have a Shaklinu Inach. Ashtamias Antinu Nialei. The Amalei Alpha became. He says, you should know, had you said that I still want to pay it back, Rabba would have taken it from you. So now it's not too late. Go back and tell him Alpha Pecan I still want to pay it back. Also, so he brought it to him. But Amalei, he says Alpha Pecan, I still want to pay it back. And Shiklinu Minei, Rabba accepted it. He said, this scholar did not know this trick sort of in the beginning when he tried to pay me back initially. Amar of Yehudah, Amar of Yehudah, Amar of Nachman. Yehudah says the name of Nachman. Neman Adam Loimar, Pruzbul Hayabiyadi for Avim Meno. Person is believed to say, I had a pruzbul and it was lost. My timer, what's the reason? Kivin the Tekinu Rabbanon pruzbul, Lashavik Ketera Va'achal Isura. He would not leave the permitted pathway and do something that's prohibited. In other words, all it takes is just to write the silly document. And therefore, presumably, if he says he wrote it, he actually wrote it. He wouldn't do something that's prohibited when he had an easy pathway to make it permitted. He also l'kamei de Rav, when he went in front of Rav, Amarlei midi pruzbul hayalach. 1 second. When a story involving requiring a prusbul came in front of Rav would ask him, "You probably have a prusbul, don't you?" As he would suggest to the guy that he has a prusbul, and he would say, "This is a way." In other words, if somebody forgets about the rules of prusbul and doesn't mention it in the court suggests him, reminds him, that if he has a prusbul, he should be able to collect. So now we learned you have a creditor who wants to collect a loan but doesn't have a prusbul. He shouldn't pay. In that case, he should not pay back. According to this brisa, this Mishnah, which is in Ksubis, it's clearly the case that you don't just presume he had a prusbul. You actually have to have the document with you if you want to collect. The Gemara says Tanoihi. It is a machlokes Tana. The Tanya we find the brisa says there's a debate whether or not if you have to have a prusbul in order to collect the document, or we believe you or presume that you have a prusbul and we allow you to collect even without one. Okay, stop here. We'll continue tomorrow.